Ghastly Gospels is in association with Blurred.
Welcome back, everybody, to Ghastly Gospels, where we preach fear one gospel at a time.
Ooh,
I really like that one.
spookiness.
I really do.
That's fire.
As
That's
you guys
fire.
know, I am Dr. Kaori Knight here with Captain Diesel.
Hello, Sunchild.
Oh my God. And last week we talked about the legendary serial killers. We got into Jack the Ripper, we got into the Zodiac, and we got into the Axeman of Louisiana, or New Orleans, whichever one it was. But we also started talking about a case that is actually still cold to this day, which just leads us into the subject of our conversation today. How did you feel about last episode?
I love this episode. For full transparency to the viewers, I was dying by the end of it because I was completely fatigued and tired. Um, but I really enjoyed it. I thought the Zodiac stuff was really fun for me to deep dive into, especially as someone who
Mm-hmm.
has seen a million different iterations of that killer and his ways of going about killing people in TV and movies. So it was good to actually see the root of what was going on with him.
Agreed. I did also like it. Getting the chance to look at the Axeman of Louisiana was interesting, especially because it was talked about and shown a little bit during American Horror Story. So that was fun.
Mm.
Getting into the Black Dahlia a little bit, not into too much tremendous detail, was also good. And that leading into this topic this week is just great, actually.
Yeah, you
So,
want to tell the people what we're covering?
yes, we are covering unsolved or cases that keep you up at night. Not necessarily unsolved, but cases that keep you up at night. And there are several of these cases that keep me up at night. But it's just because I want to keep looking up things. But I know there are several of these topics that go around through TikTok, and there are all these cases that I've never heard of before, and I spend hours just digging through. Of course, one of the main topics will always be JonBenet Ramsey. Um, but this one in particular that I'm going to present to you guys, I heard about this when it first happened back in 2013, and I have followed it since then because I just think the way that it was treated is unnecessarily difficult, especially when you're pretending like nothing happens. The case of Kendrick Johnson.
Okay, okay. It's a black ass
Have you heard
name.
of this one?
I
Well,
have
he's
not.
black.
Yeah, I was like,
he
it's got to be a black guy.
he is
Kendrick
black.
Johnson. That is a
He
black
is
character
black.
name if I've
Yes.
ever heard one.
Yes, and he's actually from Georgia, Valdosta. Valdosta.
Valdosta, yeah, that's super.
Yeah.
That's like South Georgia. It's about 30 minutes south
Yeah.
of where I went to school at. Funny enough.
So for those who have never heard of this case, in particular, Kendrick Johnson is the kid that they found. He was a high school kid. They found rolled up inside of a gym mat
No, oh, that's
in
that
the gymnasium.
story.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
really,
Yes.
really
Yes. Yes.
quickly. I know I'm so sorry to stop the flow. This story is something that really hit me a lot due to the fact of when I was wrestling in high school, my grandma and my mom would always point back to that story as to like why they didn't want me to wrestle initially. It was like, oh, they gonna find you roll up in the mat like this kid, because
Mm-hmm.
this story went everywhere, and it was a whole conversational piece. So I'm so excited to cover this.
So yes, this case, but I'm not even going to say court case, but this case is just one that bothers me ever so much because it was so mishandled um, by everybody, honestly. So Just to give some backstory. So in 2013, January 11th, 2013, Kendrick Johnson was discovered inside a vertical rolled up gym mat in the gymnasium of Lowndes High School. And he was a student there. Now, the preliminary investigation and autopsy said that his death was accidental, and they were saying that he fell in looking for a shoe and got stuck, um, and suffocated. And it's weird that they said that because where the students there were 2 students that found him, they had to go to the top to even find him in that mat. Do you see how, like, that sounds weird, right?
Yeah, like the fact because I don't know if people know how tall like a wrestling mat is, but it's pretty fucking big because these are usually mats that are encompassing the entire room, or depending on how big your school is or how expensive they are. But at least to my experience, the ones that I used, they were pretty wide. So when we rolled those things up, they were pretty high up. So you had to literally for you to see the top of that, you would have to get like either a step ladder or like a legit ladder to like climb up to the top of it to see.
And not only that, it's on top of other mats. So he had to climb up on top of other mats to get to this mat in particular, looking for a shoe. And I was just like, looking for a shoe is okay, all right, sure. And there were 2 students that they were accusing of it. And but they were sons of an FBI agent that went to the school.
Nigga, what?
Yes. The
Random
2
ass
boys
FBI
that they
agent.
were talking, they were sons of an FBI agent who they attended the school. And
Mm,
so that was something else. So the family actually decided to do their own investigation, and they said that he had blunt force trauma
mm,
to the back of the head. Now they did say that there were 3 students at the school that told investigators that it was really common for some students to store their shoes behind or under the rolled up mats. And he was not wearing any shoes when he was found. And one of the students said that he shared a pair of shoes with Johnson after gym class, and that he would always go to the mats, jump up, and toss the shoes in the middle of the hole. That does not sound right if you're sharing a pair of shoes.
yeah, even again, I know I keep speaking to the year of wrestling experience I have, but again, when we were doing it, and I was one who also shared my shoes. We had a brand new pair of shoes that me and um another teammate shared because we were in different weight classes. But even that being the case, yeah, we never. Why would you throw your shoes away knowing that somebody's gonna need to use them right after you or before you?
Right. And it's just there are several things that were weird. So, the independent autopsy that was done later found that after his body had been recovered from the mat and had passed through a funeral home, it had been stuffed with newspapers.
Hmm.
And
Um.
that's also very weird. The funeral home that processed the body following the FBI's autopsy stated that they never received his internal organs from the coroner, and the coroner was said to have destroyed they that the organs were destroyed through natural process and discarded by the prosecutor before the body was sent back home to Georgia. Now, why would you do that?
That I had no idea this case went this deep. like, like growing up
Right.
and hearing about this, I knew it was a problem, but I had no idea it was getting this diabolical. Like
Right.
FBI agent parents hiding it. Yeah, my bad. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, no. And then it's because it's standard for the funeral home. If you're going to take the organs typically go in a bag. And um especially like if you happen to be an organ donor, um they can send your organs, or the parents can sign for the organs to be sent or whatever have you, um to a hospital. So like if the organs had gone to a hospital and he was an organ donor, that would make sense. But his organs were just not there, and then they were naturally destroyed and discarded before the prosecutor sent the body back. And it's like, hmm, why are you doing that? So
Nah,
the
this
family listen, look,
I know
the family
I'm not
was
cutting
like,
off.
absolutely not.
This is a black family
Yeah,
too, so you already know they teeing up. Like, what the hell is going on with my
absolutely
baby?
right. So they actually requested the body to be exhumed a second time. And that was in 2018. In 2013, they had 290 hours of surveillance tape from 35 cameras that covered the gym area. A forensic analysis that was enlisted by CNN found that the tapes from two cameras were missing an hour and 5 minutes of footage, while another set was missing 2 hours and 10 minutes.
So the writing's on the wall with this at this point. We kind of
Right.
FBI dad missing footage, body being messed with. Yeah, it's kind of you kind of already know what it is.
hmm And then some of the lapses in coverage were found to result from camera systems that were not synchronized with each other. There were timestamps between some separate cameras that differed by as much as 20 minutes for the same time period, giving the impression of a gap for portions of the footage where no gap existed. There was other missing footage that was a result of the camera's motion activated function not being triggered. The camera systems were motion activated using a change in light pixels to turn recordings on and off. So the area where his body was discovered and where the gym mats were stored was not covered by surveillance cameras, which if you attend the school, you know that.
Very interesting.
Right. And so um the family, of course, thought that or felt like the camera footage was edited as part of a cover up. Um, but they attempted to explain the anomalies and were saying like it was just the camera system not working. And then they started to try to say that the Johnson family had not been entirely truthful in their statements. So, of
Well,
course, when you can't, when you're trying to cover up something, you start turning on the family.
mm-hmm.
To this day, they have not figured out who did it. They do have the part where he entered the gym and that's where he died, but they also had two students entering the gym after him, and that was around the time that the cameras just miraculously stopped working or footage was missing.
This is a crazy case. I'm not gonna lie. This much. This is legit worthy of some sort of series or movie. I'm not gonna lie.
I think they did like a documentary of sorts on this, but again, like there were so many things going on because then like in 2021 it was reopened and they put up a $500,000 reward, and this was specifically the Lowndes County Sheriff Ashley Polk. He put up his $500,000 of his own money for information leading to the conviction of anyone who killed Kendrick Johnson.
Wait.
And they pour through, yeah,
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
What this?
Because I think in 2016, uh, they weren't going to be filing any criminal charges against the two people who were suspected, and they also felt like there during the federal investigation there was obstruction and grand jury witness tampering. Like there was a lot of stuff going on with this case. behind the scenes.
This literally is, it feels
And
like a situation of them of like again like the FBI protecting their own is what this feels like. It feels
mhm.
yeah, if you're watching this down from an outside perspective looking in, it does sound like those kids committed that murder either voluntarily or involuntarily. Dad stepped in to protect them, and then the FBI had to step in behind him to protect him. It's just because it's just it's too much coincidental, crazy espionage like stuff going on with this case.
Yep, and then it was officially closed in 2022, where Polk finally like released something saying that there was no homicide, no cover up, no conspiracy in his death. It was simply a tragic and bizarre accident, and uh, he would not be claiming there was anything wrong with the original investigation or that the original investigation's conclusion of an accidental death was wrong.
Bizarre accidental death is a very interesting collection of words. I will say that.
Very much so. A very interesting way to put that because y'all know it sounds weird. And it's the fact, honestly, that y'all know that there are no cameras there. And you still had footage of those two going into there after him. And there, of course, were some reports of him being bullied by these two in particular. So
Mhm.
you have all of these things, and then you're still, oh, he just fell in there and couldn't breathe.
And it was
What?
what's sad about it is from the because at least the initial way that I heard about it was that he fell in there upside down and he passed away through that blood rushing to his head. But to your point, I think you mentioned the blunt force trauma. It seems like he was struck in the back of the head in a very aggressive manner that maybe ended his life, and they hit the body in the mats for whatever reason. Is what it sounds like from looking at this information you presented.
Yeah, and then so, like, you have the blunt force trauma that knocks him out, and then you put him in there, and they're saying that and they even actually have a picture, of him from the investigation inside the mat still,
Gosh.
and you can see his feet. Um, and it still doesn't really actually make any sense the way that they're saying it happened. Because those mats are very heavy, and saying that somebody was able to just as easily fall through looking for a shoe, as you were putting it, just it doesn't sound right at all.
It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense
None.
whatsoever. And again, to give proper context to people that aren't familiar with the way these mats are sized, like again, it took 3 or 4 of my like people to roll up one mat because these were at least these mats we had were broken down into like halves, I believe. So it takes 3 or 4 very large high school boys to roll these things up. And then to for us all to move this to the side of the because we were doing our practices in like the band room, so we had to put those mats down there and we had to move them to the back of the room.
Mhm.
That's just a lot to do. So for this
Yeah.
kid to find his way up there, and to my knowledge, this isn't a very he's isn't a very large boy either. He's a more age appropriate sized kid. For him to get all the way up there, fall in, no, I'm sorry, that doesn't sound right.
Fall
This is
in with no assistance, so nobody went into the gym the rest of the time? That's what you're saying?
and I'm so surprised there was no other forensic evidence like fingerprints that came up. They didn't like discuss him maybe like struggling because I know sometimes when you're looking at a confrontation, they'll look at skin cells or blood traces underneath fingernails, things like that. None of
Mhm.
that was found on this body.
Nope.
That's so interesting to me because I don't because there's no way to explain the blunt force trauma on the head. If the story is he fell in by accident and died that way through the blood rushing to his head, how is the blunt force trauma explained?
But they're also trying to say that there was no blunt force trauma. So, like,
Oh.
the government the government or the prosecutor who had when the police do their autopsy they use their people,
Mhm.
they are the ones saying that he died from suffocating in the mat, and that's all fine and good, but then the family does their gets like an independent, somebody who doesn't work with the government to also do an autopsy,
Mhm.
they're finding that he had blunt force trauma to the back of the head, and it could have either killed him then, and then, he'd be thrown in there, or it could have knocked him out, and they threw him into the mat, and he suffocates that way, in the way that the other autopsy is saying,
Yeah, so either way,
because
blunt
now
force
he
trauma
can't
either
move.
killed him. Yeah.
Right,
Either died through the
right, right,
suffocation
right.
of being put there from being knocked out, or he died from the actual impact. Yeah, that's crazy. That's so
Yep.
crazy.
Yep, and it's still not being solved. It's so wild to me, and them closing it and making it sound like the family was crazy. Mm-mm.
Yeah, that again, that traumatized a lot of black families in the South because my grandmother and my mother, who for the most part get their news from Facebook or maybe the morning news, like them seeing that and seeing the way that affected them to where they were like, yeah, we don't want you doing this at all. Like I had to
Right.
fight for the ability to continue on wrestling because it was just fun for me at that point in time. That put a lot of fear in a lot of black families' hearts.
Yes, yes, it did.
Oh
And
man.
so that one is definitely one that is talked about a lot. The missing organs, the suspicious removal of the organs and then stuffing with newspaper is also so crazy to me, because that is not a normal funeral home practice.
Yeah, what do they normally do with the organs in a funeral home? Do you know?
They put them in a bag and they put them back in the body.
Oh wow. So they're still not aware of where his organs are at all.
The attorney general or whoever it was like, the organs were this hold on, what did they say? I just said it too. The organs in the body were destroyed through a natural process, or through natural process, and discarded by the prosecutor before the body was sent back to Georgia.
At some point, I'm so interested in trying to find somebody who works within the system or works within maybe funeral home process or something of the sort because in a case this bizarre where there's possibly foul play, it seems so illogical to have some of the only pieces of evidence in his organs being destroyed before the case being closed.
Yep, that was the weird part. That's actually, and then his body being stuffed with newspaper. That was the one of the complaints of the family, because why would you do that?
Without consulting the family first as well. Like, I don't.
Yep. And that was also one of their complaints, because they said nothing to the family. The family just so happened to discover that his body was filled with newspaper. Usually, the funeral home fills like the body with cotton, or sawdust or something like that, in
Mhm.
order for it to keep its shape and things like that on the inside. But you just stuffed him with newspaper and destroyed his organ.
Did they sue the funeral home, I'm
They
assuming? I
did.
don't. Yeah.
They did, and they said that the funeral home didn't do anything wrong.
That is insane. That is
Absolutely
insane.
insane. They just have different practices, but none of it is necessarily illegal. Disposing of my child's remains or organs without saying anything to me is definitely a violation of civil rights, because what the fuck are you doing?
We gotta find a funeral home owner to figure out like what the common practice is across most. Because is there like a funeral home convention or something where they like exchange information? Or I don't know. I don't know what the common practice
Not
is, but
necessarily a convention, but there's a TV show that I watch. She is a she owns a morgue.
mhm.
Um, and she goes kind of through like what it is that they do when they do there's the embalming, or even if you watch what is that fucking show that we like? Mike Flanagan.
Oh, the show or
Haunting
the
of Hill House.
Haunting Hill House? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Haunting of Hill House. Where she kind of goes through what it is that she's gonna do.
Mhm.
But just in general, because in Tennessee, one of our somebody who's like really close with our family owns funeral home. So they embalm them, of course, like the embalming fluid, but if you're transporting the way that they did, like, with my grandmother, if you're transporting a body, it has to be filled with something until you can get them embalmed.
Right, right.
And so that's where they would do, like, cotton or sawdust. Newspaper is not good at all. They did the investigation, and the Georgia Secretary of State's office found that the funeral home did not follow best practices and that other material was more acceptable than newspaper, but they cleared them of any wrongdoing.
I'd also be
Eh,
interested to know what brought the family to this specific funeral home at some point, because I felt like
this
you
was
would
the
do it.
state. This was not the family.
So wait, the
The
family didn't
family
have a
had a
decision?
different The family did not have this funeral home. The family had another funeral home, and that's how they discovered that their son's body was filled with newspaper.
Oh wow, this is this is insane. Yeah,
The
we
family did not trust anything that they were doing. So when they found out that when his body passed through that funeral home that they had chosen, the funeral home came to them and was like, "All right, so we got your son's body. His organs are not here, and his body's been filled with newspaper." And then they find out that the organs had been discarded by the prosecutor before the body had been sent back.
no, we yeah, we gotta find somebody that works with dead bodies in this process to like speak to for. We gotta find a guest. These are some of the we gotta find an interesting guest that can break this down because I'm so curious as to why that would be even a thought process in this situation at all, or how
Yeah, when you're like
we can maybe revisit this in the future with somebody with a professional. I wanna find some professionals in the field that can speak to this
Yeah, well, I mean, when you're covering up something, you do whatever.
type shit. Oh my gosh.
But that is still that's all from me on this case. They closed it in 2022, which makes me very sad, because he definitely deserves way more justice than what he got.
Right. Well, for my story, it's going to have a happier ending, thank God. And funny enough, this case also was closed in 2022, but after a 30 plus year process. Um, and part of the reason I want to give people this a little bit of technicality here, because initially when me and Carrie were talking about this episode, we know we talked about unsolved crimes. And as I was digging through this case, I didn't realize that the case had actually ended. Because again, this is something that started in like 1990 or 1991. No,
Mm,
other yes, I think it was believe. I think it was either 1991 or maybe the early 2000s. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it has a happy ending. But let me just stop giving guess preliminaries and get into it. Actually. But this obviously is going to start with Miss Jessica Gutierrez. Miss Jessica Gutierrez was born in December 3rd in 1991 in South Carolina. She is the youngest sibling to two sisters and a brother, and she has a mother who is a single mother due to the father separating and kind of leaving his kids and his family, you know, off to their own vices. Not vices. That's not the word for that. He abandons his family, for lack of a better sense. And
mhm.
he leaves them to their mother, Debbie Gutierrez, who is a very, very, very strong woman who works a lot and obviously is not in the best economic situation. So, whenever she's working a lot, she has to leave her kids to be taking care of themselves, essentially at home. A lot of the older siblings are taking care of the younger siblings, and not vice versa, but for the most part, you understand what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
But we realized one night that, unlike others, Debbie usually would have Jessica, who is the youngest child, obviously sleep with her in the bed because this is a smaller home. So the siblings are kind of sharing beds, and usually the youngest child is sleeping with Debbie to kind of save space. Usually it's Jessica, but in this night, her older brother was having some kind of a sickness with his congestion or something of the sort. It was a sickness that doesn't need a lot of detail, but this led to the mother being a good mother having her son sleep with her in the bed that night and then sending Jessica to sleep with her older sister in the bed in the other room, in the girls' room that night. Now,
Okay.
this being the case, just Debbie wakes up the next morning and she's going about doing things as normal. I think one of the older sisters asked for cereal that morning and things are going as you would expect a normal morning to go. Now, where things got very interesting is obviously Debbie is noticing that her baby's not there. She's, "Hey, where's Jessica? Jessica's not around." She then asked her older sister, Rebecca, who was sleeping in the room with them, "Hey, where's my daughter? Where's your sister at?" She then responds with saying that a man in a magic hat and a beard came and took her sister.
Oh my god.
Obviously, this is kind of a crazy thing to mention or a crazy thing to say in general. So Debbie's not really giving it too much seriousness initially because obviously kids say the darndest things. She's kind of in
Mhm.
denial, like proceeding to look around for her child, assuming that Jessica is playing hide and go seek around the house and just doing kid things. Once she continues to not find her child and a lot of that reality sets in, she runs back to her child and is at this point screaming and demanding, "Where is my daughter?" Like asking, trying to find out where's my daughter. And the daughter is giving the same story about the magic man or the man in a magic hat and a beard taking their sister. But this time she's giving a little bit more of a detail into what happened. See, Rebecca says that when the magic man came in with the beard, that before he approached them, he turns off the nightlight and unplugs the fan. And she sees him pick their sister up and walk out of the room. Now, obviously, Debbie's asking, "Hey, why didn't you call for help? Why didn't you say anything?" And then, sadly to say, which is kind of a realistic situation in most instances where there's trauma involved or fear, she freezes up. She says, "I was scared. I froze up and I hid underneath the covers." Because obviously, you're scared. Random man in your house taking your sister. You don't know what you're going to do at that point in time.
Right.
Now, obviously, then Debbie then reaches out to the police, the local law enforcement, and they come in and they are canvassing the whole place. Oh, I forgot to mention this. Another thing that Debbie mentioned being very odd here was that when she noticed things were odd was that the front door was wide open. Obviously, the door is usually locked every night. The front door was wide open and the dog was in the house. So that kind of led to trying to figure out how did this person get in the house with the door being locked. Now, the police get
Right.
here and the police are canvassing the area and they find out that there is a fingerprint on the living room window and they found a pack of cigarettes and multiple cigarette buds near that window as well. Now, the police asked Jessica, they questioned her again for the story. Not Jessica, I'm sorry. They questioned Rebecca, the sister, and asked again, "Can you retell the story and give us as much detail as possible?" Which is when she then kind of gives a lot more of the information in regards to him being very specific in turning off the fan and the nightlight as to be very silent as he was approaching the house. It seemed like that the man was being very intentional about proceeding very quietly and very stealthily, obviously knowing that he's not supposed to be there.
Mhm.
Now, during the recounting the mother gave, obviously because she was questioned right after, she realizes that she may have a strong guess on who may have taken her child. See, a few days before the incident, Debbie broke up with the man that she was dating for several months. And she described this man as being somebody who is very mean. He is very aggressive, very controlling, and he had a drinking problem. So she was like, okay, he could have possibly done it because we just broke up a few days beforehand. She then proceeded with the police supervision to call him from the police station, and obviously this man is denying all the allegations, saying, "Why would I take your child? That's nonsense," et cetera, et cetera. And sadly enough, there was no evidence tying him to the crime, so he as a suspect was out of the way. They then looked to maybe say, "Oh, maybe the child's father, in a sin of a sense of revenge or annoyance, came back to grab his daughter." But obviously, that wasn't a no go because the father had moved out of state a while ago and was there's no possible way that he could have taken her based on the evidence that was there again. So we're kind of just at a standstill at this point. To make things a little bit even more sad, experts with police and law enforcement ran those fingerprints that they found on the window, but there were no known results of anyone in the system of who could have done this. So there's no
Of
criminals
course.
that have been arrested. So at this point, there's just like no hope. Police
Mm.
then did their darndest to find this girl. They were searching all the areas around the home because this house was in the outskirts of the city, so they're kind of in the country slightly. So the police are searching abandoned buildings, they're searching creeks, the forest near them, the streams, rivers. They're searching everywhere they can to find this child. And a few days later, the FBI got involved to try to assist with the process, and even they at the time couldn't find anything. The sheriff even brought in an airplane to canvass the area around the home and in the forest, and they still could not find any traces of this child or find anything to do with this child being missing. During this time, Debbie was getting kind of restless, as you would expect a mother to do, and she communicated the police. She rarely communicated with the police in general when it comes to this case. She only would hear from them when she would call the police to ask for updates and things like that. So she was getting restless at this point, and she started to feel like that she is not getting the best service in finding this child. And she's calling the sheriff one day and accuses him of not doing all he can to find her daughter. At this point, the sheriff kind of takes that as a personal attack, and he's insulted, and he then threatens that if she does not calm down and let him do his job, he'll call off the search altogether and quote say that they would forget about this case and Jessica as a whole.
That is
Obvious,
insane. What the hell?
yes. Obviously, Debbie being the fucking super mom she is, on the phone she has, she proceeded to record that entire conversation, which this is gonna come back later in the story. So now Debbie has a phone recorded conversation of the sheriff threatening to call off the investigation. 10 weeks after the kidnapping, there are a series of random crimes that happen. A local man breaks into a house in the area and he gets chased off with a gun, obviously, as they're in a home invasion. And then he proceeds to steal a van and drive all the way up to North Carolina. And he invades a woman's home and assaults her there. Shortly after, he was arrested and his fingerprints were entered into the system as you would normally do. And those fingerprints were a match to the window of Jessica's kidnapping. Now, the man in question, it was a
Mm-mm.
man who was 27 years old at the time, and he went by the name of Thomas McDowell. Now, Debbie, after finding out, she told the police that she knew this man. This is somebody that she was very familiar with because just a few months earlier, just a few months earlier before the kidnapping, she hired him to build a shed at her house and fix the porch awning. Because I guess she met him through family. So this is like a general friend of the family to an extent. Another fact
Mhm.
that she noted was that Thomas has a beard and he was always wearing this big 10-gallon cowboy hat everywhere he went. So, obviously, the thought process that maybe Jessica, the older sister that saw everything, or I think it was Rebecca. I can't remember the two. It was two sisters, and they got
Rebecca.
to account. Yeah, Rebecca was one sister. I think Jessica gave the account of the nightlight and things. So both of these sisters saw the whole situation. So it was pretty much thought that Jessica may have mistaken this big cowboy hat as a top hat that a wizard would wear. There's
Mhm.
one problem though. Even though the fingerprint matched, there was no other evidence tying him to this crime. So they couldn't convict him. They couldn't say he was the one that done it. And also because there was no body, the assumption was that that fingerprint was there or could have been left there from 2 months previous where he was doing work on the home.
Right.
Police though said that the fingerprints were fresh, and because the fingerprints weren't distorted by any weather, like rain or anything of that sort, that couldn't have been the case. As well as Debbie made sure she always cleaned that window because her kids are nasty as hell and would always leave fingerprints and things around that window in general. So she made sure to always clean that window because it was also the window that she would look outside to check on her kids with when she was like at home. So this window was
Right.
getting cleaned frequently, and weather also did not distort his fingerprint. So we know by a fact of the law that Thomas had to have been at the home relatively frequently for that to be the case.
Right.
Debbie also noted that one day while he was working on the home, she forgot her keys in the house and locked herself outside of her house, and she had to proceed to climb through the window to get in the home, and that she was pretty certain that Thomas would have seen her do that as a way
Right.
and noticed that was a way that he could get inside of the home. This all being said, though, there wasn't enough evidence to tie him to the crime, and he was eventually sentenced to 10 years for the assault of the woman that I mentioned earlier. And this is obviously kind of sad because there's no justice or no anything served for regards um, to Jessica's kidnapping. I'm tripping.
Right.
Some time later on, is an interesting situation that happens here. Thomas's cellmate in prison reaches out to the police saying that he admitted to the kidnapping. He says that Thomas told him in the cell that he kidnapped a girl to assault her, and during the act, she bit him, and out of rage, he then murdered her,
Oh
dismembered her
my god.
body, and then took the remains to a field and left them there.
Oh
The
my gosh.
police then spoke with him. They went to speak with Thomas and asking about the crime. He, for the most part, didn't deny the allegations, but he did say that he would confess to the crime if he could get full immunity to the crime.
Mm,
Obviously, the police can't promise something like that. So the police were kind of empty handed because they can't get a full confession and he won't give the full confession without the immunity. So they're kind of at a stalemate at this point. Debbie then, being annoyed with the police and their way they were conducting this investigation, she eventually decides, hey, I'm going to go about trying to solve my child's crime, my child's potential murder on my own. I'm going to figure this shit out on my own. She
right.
then goes and canvasses different abandoned fields and whatnot, and eventually she finds this abandoned truck and she looks inside of it. And this abandoned truck has clothing fibers that match the pajamas that Jessica had worn to bed that night. The police,
Mm,
though, did rush to that lead, and they did rush to try to like follow up on that because they find it very suspicious that Debbie was found to have all this evidence and finding this truck and finding these clothing fragments without any help or any special tools or resources from the government or the police department in general. They were like, "Hey, it's kind of suspicious that you found all this shit by yourself randomly." But they didn't really question it too much. They didn't really make her a suspect. Over the years, there were interviews that Debbie did with multiple different places, calling out the police for not doing everything they could do. And she was kind of just, again, really, really annoyed with the whole situation over the years. In 19, no, in, I'm so sorry, in the late 90s, early 2000s, the Cold Case Files was a TV show, obviously, that people would probably remember that was airing. And this
I
case
love cold
appeared
case files.
Right. This case appeared on that TV show, which led to a bunch of different leads from different random people that watching the series. Obviously, none of those leads were, at least according to the police, led to anything significant. So they kind of just let the thing pass by again. Soon after that, Jessica became the first child in South Carolina to have an aged up photo made of her to kind of help find her as an adult, possibly. Because they, at this point, they're just trying, just not Jessica, but Debbie is trying everything she can to try to get this thing done and try to find her child. After a while, she got fed up. And in 2007, 21 years after the initial kidnapping, Debbie publicly criticized the police department again. But this time, she remembered that she had the recording from the sheriff all those years prior, and she released this audio to the public. Now, the sheriff
As
then
she
denied,
should.
right? The sheriff then denied the allegations, saying that he doubled down at that point in time after that phone call, and he put more police on the investigation. But another interesting thing in regards to the case and Debbie's efforts to try to get more help, she was reaching out to other agencies and other parties to try to get involved in solving this murder, but the local prosecutor's office were denying the attempts. Now, this kind of all comes full
Hmm.
circle where in 2014, the sheriff that was in charge of all this stuff, he ended up facing charges related to fraud and bribery, leading to him getting fired and jailed for 12 months.
Mm,
2 years after that, the prosecutor that was involved all this time was arrested on a hit and run, which led to him resigning from his position. In
mm, mm, mm,
2021,
mm.
the new sheriff reopened the case with the FBI's help. And eventually, after they were going through all the evidence, they concluded that there was enough evidence to convict Thomas and found out through his family, in questioning family and friends, that he abruptly changed his appearance by cutting his beard and his long hair right after the abduction was announced, or right after the abduction. And he also ditched and stopped wearing his big 10-gallon cowboy hat. Obviously, knowing
I bet
that
he did.
the children, the little girls had seen what he looked like at that point in time. So he changed his appearance very rapidly. They also
Yep.
confirmed through family and friends that the cigarettes found at the scene of the crime were the same brand of cigarettes that he normally smokes all the time. All that being said,
Mhm.
the one downside that they had during this whole situation is that the police and FBI couldn't find any DNA on this evidence, which they thought to be the case because of the fact that this was tested so many different times by the police years prior. And then obviously this time over the years, it's just got a little bit harder to find this evidence on this, or find DNA on the evidence.
Right.
Eventually, the authorities figured out, we have enough evidence to bring this case to trial and try this man for this murder. And in January 2022, Thomas was brought to trial as a 62-year-old man, and was undergoing the whole process. And obviously, he was denying the allegations. His lawyers then saying, obviously, a lot of things that was mentioned prior with the factor of the fingerprints on the window could have been due to the work he did there previously. There's not enough evidence here to really stick, at least from the defensive side of things. But on a happy note, in February 8th, the trial ended, and this led to a unanimous conviction, sending this man, Thomas McDowell, to jail at the age of 62 years old. Now, although this is somewhat of a happy story, the mother, as well as a lot of the family, was still kind of sad because this man was able to, after his 10-year sentence prior, live a pretty long life on the outside without having to worry about being in hot water for this case for the most part. But
Yeah.
again, we got the conviction at the end of the day, but it's sad to say that it took this long and it took this much effort to get this thing done because obviously the police department and the prosecutor's office were corrupt in many different aspects. And for whatever reason, it felt like they were on purpose trying to cover this case up. So when you were going through your case earlier, I found it very interesting that there's a lot of foul play and possible tampering there because it seems like it was the same way with this. Now I don't know
Yeah.
if the police department had any kind of connection with Mr. McDowell at all, but it definitely seemed like at some point the police were doing something shady that led to them either just giving up or not wanting to continue the case and lying to the mother at some point. And shout out to the mother for knowing something was off and continuing to persist to try to get help to solve this case all the years after. Because I think most people would get advice from the church, friends, family to hey, move on, continue your life on with the rest of the kids you have. But she never gave up hope in finding that we could convict this man for the murder of her child. So
Right.
that is the
Hmm.
case of Miss Jessica Gutierrez, who her body has not been found to this day. Her remains have not been found, and it's very unlikely that all these years later her remains will be found because if they haven't found them yet, it's probably not going to happen at this point.
Yeah. It's interesting that you said that because I've been watching Criminal Minds for like the past week and a half. I'm on like
Mhm.
season 4. But whatever it is that they start looking for somebody else, they always end up finding, like if it's somebody who's killed multiple people over several years, they always end up finding the body of those other people. Always.
Yeah, if you found one body,
So
you probably
it's
find them
so
all.
wild. Yeah. When they figure out what their dump site is, it is always so
Mhm.
wild to me.
This is insane, and I'm. It's so sad to say because I'm trying to figure out like in the mind of this motherfucker Thomas, like why would you do this? Like, and
Yeah, like
again,
what is your reason?
obviously, I'm when they say assault, because I think assault was using a lot of the story that I was looking this up in. They didn't specify the kind of assault, but
Mhm.
it's safe to say this was assault of a sexual nature. If this is something that he was doing to women, um,
Mhm.
and it's so sad. I'm happy to know that the little girl that Jessica was fighting back to that extent, and but it's sad, man. It's sad. Especially I can't imagine being the sister or the siblings in this situation because now you have to feel guilty because if you would have screamed, you would have made noise, you would have acknowledged something, you maybe would have saved your sister. Or again, in this situation, it could have been worse where maybe she could have gotten the rest of them hurt. I don't know, but the survivor's guilt has to be insane. The grief and how much trauma this family had to go undergo through this whole process had to be insane.
Oh yeah, for sure. Survivor's guilt is always like really, really tough, for sure. Just watching
Yeah.
people who've like gone through it before and how
Mhm.
it like takes a hold of them, it's definitely bad. It gets really bad.
Especially the fact that you saw this happen and you could have said something. It's just, oh, I feel for the family. I feel for Jessica. But yeah, that's all I have on the whole case and situation in general. It was just a sad story. I mean, it had somewhat of a happy ending that we know who did it. We got justice to some extent because that man's probably going to die in jail. But it's sad to say we didn't get it a lot earlier.
It's also said she didn't find her body either.
Hmm.
'Cause I
And
know that
that's
that's a lot when it comes to, like, especially parents, because, like, when parents outlive their kids and they like, that closure of being able to, like, bury your child, even though it's hard, but she doesn't even get to do that.
Yeah, it was even crazy to me, and I think this is it's very interesting thing to me in my mind because right now, for people that are don't care or are interested, I've been watching The Rookie recently, which kind of just getting ready for Nathan Fillion's appearance in the Superman movie and whatnot. But that movie obviously, that show obviously is a form of propaganda to an extent and kind of just looking to humanize the police and all those good things. And before I researched this case, and I'm like, oh, maybe the propaganda is doing what it's supposed to do. It's maybe not all cops are so bad. I interact with a bunch of them here in my line of work more often, and they're not as bad. But when I hear stories like this, in knowing that there was 20 years plus, maybe 30 years later after the initial case, there was enough evidence to convict this man and take him to trial. But
And
all
y'all
those
chose
years
not to.
prior, yeah, all those years prior when there was fresh evidence, you're telling me that you actively made the decision not to do so. Rather that be because you felt offended because the mother called you out on being lazy or you got tired of looking or you thought there was no hope. I don't know. But the fact that two individuals had all that power and influence to make sure that this thing didn't happen or that the proper assistance wasn't given to solve this case really annoys the hell out of me.
Mhm.
And again, karma came around full circle because they lost their jobs and then were stripped of titles and things like that. And it took fresh new faces to come in and do the job properly for it to happen. But that's crazy. That's so sad.
And it was a situation that she probably could have been saved if you actually did what the fuck you were supposed to do.
Possibly, possibly, because we don't know the time period of when the murder or the assault happened. I mean, more than likely, it was probably that same night, so maybe, but there's a possibility it could have been where he held her for a little bit longer. I don't know, but
Yeah, there are always those cases, and that's actually kind of like why I like watching Criminal Minds when they give you like the facts of cases like this. And it always kind
mhm,
of just like depends on the type of killer that or the type of kidnapper that person is. So but we'll never know.
mm, but that's all we have for episode what 5, 4?
I think we are on 5.
Yeah, man, we going. Time's flying by, man. We 5 episodes in.
Time is definitely flying by, and it's always fun each episode. I love doing these episodes. So, and when you guys hear the next one, going a little bit supernatural, I think.
Yeah, I'm
Conspiracy
excited for that.
theory.
I'm so excited for that. And I want to take a moment too to thank all the listeners we've had thus far. Me and Carrie always talk about throughout the week of like the different reviews we'll see on different platforms, and especially the written reviews. Those are so beautiful and sweet. So I want to thank you guys for listening, for leaving the 5-star reviews, for leaving your thoughts and comments on the show in general. And if you have any thoughts on possible topics and things of that nature you want to see done, please leave the comments there on the platforms, or you'll probably find us on any of our individual platforms from TikTok to Instagram to Facebook, wherever. We're pretty much everywhere. So you can reach out to us and ask about specific topics and things like that you want to see.
Yep, for sure. So, anything else from you, Captain
No,
Diesel?
that is all.
All right. Well, thank you guys again for joining us here at Ghastly Gospels, where you get your dark stories and deadlier truths. And we go see you guys next week.
Bye, everybody.